You might be somebody who really wants to learn Japanese, but you feel overwhelmed because you never seem to find the time with everything else that you got going on in your life. Honestly, me too. I started studying Japanese on a whim during my master's degree, and I quickly realized that with everything else going on, I simply didn't have enough time to dedicate to this language. But as time passed, I started to appreciate it more and more, and I just didn't want to give it up. So instead, I found a few tips that I could apply in my daily life to get a little bit of practicing, even without dedicating my full attention to it. And although I'm not fluent yet, I've been able to apply these tips in my daily life and keep practicing to this day, 2 years later. So today I want to do exactly that. I want to share a few tips that I came up with that you can apply in your daily life to get a little bit of Japanese practice or just up your exposure without necessarily being overwhelming or a full-time commitment. I made a video about language learning before, but because of the Japanese learning system, I just figured that this language really did deserve a video of its own. But if you want to check it out, my other video, which is more general, is gonna be linked up somewhere on the screen. But without any further ado, let's get started. The very first thing that I want to say is for those people who are just approaching the language for the first time, if you are not on a strict schedule, like for example a language student could be, you want to focus on those parts of the language that give you the highest possible return of investment. So that means that since reading and writing in Japanese language are very hard in comparison to the other parts, you are going to focus on speaking and comprehension. Especially you're going to want to prioritize the comprehension part, because comprehension is that one skill that is going to be applicable to the other parts of the language learning. So if you understand well why certain elements are positioned within a sentence, then it's gonna be much easier to make that switch between just listening and listening to somebody in real life or actually trying to speak yourself, because you know where things are supposed to be. And even if you don't know all the vocab of a sentence, if you know the bare minimum, your brain should be able to fill in the gaps. So before you start actually learning the language, the first thing that you want to do is get a bird's eye view. That means to basically just get the general ideas, general structure of how the language works in all of its components. This is going to give your brain kind of like a framework of how to approach a particular sentence, and it will basically give you a stronger foundation to understand how to apply later grammar. And I think this is really useful because at the beginning when I was starting my Japanese studying journey, kind of was going with whatever I could find on Google, and I taught myself obviously the writing system, some kanjis, but I noticed that the way I was going about it when I was studying by myself was just writing down kanjis and vocab and trying to memorize as many kanjis as I could. And then I was also trying to like find notes online and read as much as I possibly could. But then when I started taking conversational lessons, I noticed that it was really hard for me to apply what I actually learned, because I thought that I understood the very basics that would enable me to, put coherent sentences together. But I lacked the structure that would enable me to actually be able to translate or to put those characters into a structure that is actually meaningful and can convey the information that I want to give actually properly. And in order to familiarize yourself with all of these ideas, I suggest that you pick up a Japanese grammar book, at least at level 1, and you just scroll it without focusing on any of the grammar yet, but just understanding what happens. So for example, if you go through the grammar book, you will quickly notice that in order to make a conjugation, you will need to switch the hiragana class. So go, for example, from A to E. Here I'm gonna put a list on the screen of the things that I think that you should approach first. The first one is, as I was mentioning before, sentence construction. So where things go within the sentence. Then you should know just general basic particles. What is the difference between the subject and the topic, for example, even if you don't grasp it fully at the beginning, because the difference can be subtle. I will also familiarize myself with how Japanese organize main sentences and secondary clauses, because this is a type of construction that you will see many times. What is the actual sentence that you're supposed to look at first if you don't understand the whole sentence in general, because you will see that it's actually inverted with respect to to what we use in the English language. Obviously, the other thing that you really need to familiarize yourself with is the writing system. Japanese has 3 types of writing system: hiragana, katakana, and kanji. But while hiragana and katakana you can learn quite easily, when it comes to kanjis you need to pay more attention. You really need to know your difference between a kanji in itself and a compound word, which is formed by combining multiple kanjis together. And that is why multiple pronunciations come in. When I first started approaching learning Japanese, I just wrote down the kanji that I wanted to memorize and then all types of possible reading that I could find. But then I didn't know why I was supposed to learn some reading, which one was the most common, and obviously I didn't know which one I was supposed to use because I was just memorizing all types of sounds without linking them to actually anything. Try and find as many logical connections, have as much structure as you can, because the amount of things that you have to memorize otherwise is extremely overwhelming. So you want to try and make it easy for yourself to make those connections without actually having to memorize everything. So for example, if you just memorize a few kanjis and a few compound words that use that kanji, then you can try and see what the reading of the compound word might be. And this leads me to my tip number 2. I don't know about you, but I learned the grammar of my own language through charts. They would give me a summary of every single possible tense in my language and how it was supposed to be conjugated. When I started learning Japanese, I couldn't find this structure. I'm guessing that it's because it's not very used, maybe in different cultures, to, approach the language this way. But it relates to the point I made before. It's really important to get like a kind of general overview of what you're getting into before you actually dive into that. I find it's really useful to have a chart of this type, and this is not updated. I need to add a few things, and I have it for both verbs and adjectives because in Japanese adjectives get conjugated as well, and it contains basically the main conjugation that I might need. So you have the long form, short form, past and present, so that you have them all in one place and you have a chart that you can refer to. Also because in Japanese many of the forms of the verbs that you have conjugated are the basis of other conjugations. So for example, you would want to write down the te forms because many other grammatical structures rely on the te form. So just have them in one place, at least the most important ones, so you can easily refer to them and you can have again that frame in your mind on how things are supposed to switch. And this is especially true to have if you're studying from the internet. If you don't have a book, I recommend you have at least one resource. I do find that the material on the internet is very scattered, so I find it really hard to understand what's important and what's not important just from online resources. And then once you've built your conjugation chart, both for your adjectives and for your verbs, what you want to do is to kind of have like a reference sentence in mind for different grammatical structures that you learn. So if you find one sentence that is really easy for you to remember in your native language, the capture the ideas of that grammatical structure is going to be much easier for you to recall that. Whether again is the ne ending, the yo ending, whether it's the conjugation that expresses possibility, just having one example sentence in your head that really capture the nuance of that grammatical structure is going to make it much easier for you, because you already made a strong connection between something that is really accessible to you and the grammatical structure that you're trying to recall. The more clear, the more unique or ridiculous or very on point you make this sentence, obviously the easier it's going to be to recall it. And this leads me to point number 3, which is establish connections. Establishing connection is something that is so important because it basically tells your brain you're not trying to build something in a vacuum. Basically create an anchor for yourself, which is something that is very visual and very unique. That is going to make it much easier for you to stick that information that you're trying to learn. I will make you an example of an anchor that I first used when I started learning Japanese, and with this I learned so much vocab. Like, I was learning while watching anime, because Japanese names are formed by combinations of kanjis. A name will usually have 2 kanjis which form a compound word, and then other 2 kanjis for the last name which form still another compound word. I will pick up like an anime character of whatever anime that I was watching, and then I will literally take the first name, the last name, and then I will look up the kanjis and try to understand both the meaning of the kanjis in itself, so the first kanji and the second kanji, and the meaning of the kanjis together. And because anime characters are so highly visual cases and they are very, very colorful. So it's very easy to recall them. And because they are something that you're already watching, something that you're already invested in, you have that interest in the anime series that you're watching so that you can really remember your character. So this way I will be able to basically remember both the meaning of the kanjis by themselves and the meaning of the compound word. For example, one anime that I think it's perfect for the Japanese language, and this is actually how I learned Japanese colors, is Kuroko no Basuke. The name of the character itself recalls the color of the character's hair. So for example, you have Aomine, whose first kanji is Aoi, which is the kanji for the color blue. And then because you immediately remember the character's hair, it's so easy to make the connection and to remember the color and how you spell it, because now you made a very strong link in your head. And then what I will do is immediately write down both the meaning of the compound word and the kanjis by themselves into flashcards. And for other languages, I don't really like to use flashcards too much, but for Japanese, for learning kanji specifically, I find it is really, really useful. I actually have a ton of them, and that is because I'm trying to remember the visual side of the kanjis itself. By using flashcards, I'm upping my own exposure to the visual side of the kanjis itself, so that even if you're not able to read that kanji right away, when you find yourself in front of a sentence, you're still able to understand the meaning of it, which is, you know, the number one thing that we are trying to build right now, which is comprehension. And this leads me to another very important part, which is space repetition. While before, through establishing connection, we created these anchors, which were like the glue through which glue new information in so that they stick. Through spaced repetition, we make sure they don't unglue themselves. And that is because the brain considers more important things that it sees frequently, and if you consider them more important, it's more likely to remember them. That's why I was mentioning that I do use flashcards, and I have a system when it comes to flashcards because I find it is really effective. And the idea is you want to practice whatever cards you know the least. So I have my flashcards and I'm going to separate them into stacks depending on how confident I am at recollecting that particular picture. At the beginning, when you start, obviously all of your cards are going to be in your first stack, which is going to be the stack of cards that you don't know. The second time that you try, probably some are going to move to the second stack, some of them are going to stay in this first stack. The idea is that over time, going to shift more and more flashcards to your right until basically on your left, you only have the new flashcards. Each one of these stacks is going to have a different repetition time frame. So for example, the first one are the flashcards that you want to repeat every single day. The second one, the ones that you want to repeat every 3 days. The third one, the cards that you want to repeat once a week. The other one every 2 weeks. It really doesn't matter if you actually stick to these schedules, because let's be real, I'm never able to revise them at those intervals, but it kind of gives me a framework once again. It allows me to focus my revision and my studies so I can immediately know which one I know the least. So I know, even though I cannot actually practice them every day as I would like to, I can still go and practice them first. So overall, your practice ends up being much more focused. And this leads me to today's sponsor. I'm really happy to talk about MochiKanji. MochiKanji is like the perfect app to help you with your spaced repetition, especially on the go. Like for example, I love doing kanji repetition when I'm at the airport, when I'm just waiting for my flight, and this is the perfect app to do that. What I really like about this app is that it's so extremely visual that it's so easy to remember the kanjis and the content, because not only they will give you a flashcard with the kanji and the meaning, but they will also draw little picture on them so that you're actually able to remember the content a little bit easier. And when you answer the question, they will actually have example sentences so that you not only see pronunciation of the card, but you're actually able to see that sentence applied in context. And what I think that is absolutely fantastic, because I never seen it in an app before, the material that they take for the flashcards are taken from your grammar books. So for example, I'm using Genki as my source material, and they actually have flashcards with terminology and vocab taken directly from the Genki book built into the app, so that I don't have to go through the pain of building those flashcards myself. And they also have industry specialized terms terminology and flashcards, so that if you have a particular need, you're probably going to find targeted language for what you need. If you're in a particular field and you really need to learn that Japanese content or that Japanese vocab, you can request them to add that for you. And then as you go and as you learn more and more flashcards, they're actually going to divide them into stacks depending on how well you know that particular word. So it's basically the exact same system that we were talking about before. So at level 1, those words are new, so you probably need to practice them more often, and at level 5, you basically have memorized that word, you're good to go. And whenever you learn new words, they get added to a little digital notebook so that you can keep track of what you learn, so you can go ahead and check them. Another great feature is the golden time. So basically, depending on your learning history and everything that you have done so far, the app will automatically calculate the best revision time for you. It will give you like a little practice session with a little bit of writing, a little bit of listening, a little bit of reading, so that you can review your lesson in a very comprehensive way. In between your flashcards, they also have little writing sessions that you can also take by themselves, so that instead of just remembering the general meaning of the kanji, you have a little bit more of a active participation, so that when you actually go ahead and move on to practice your writing in real life, you have that advantage of already knowing where the strokes are going to go. So if you want to give it a go, you can find it on the App Store, on Google Play, or just look up MochiKanji Learn Japanese online. You will find the link in the description. So I think that the next point is going to be my favorite, because I think that it's very fun, and that is to increase your exposure. But to do that, you're going to convert everything that you consume in Japanese. While you're doing your daily tasks, your daily chores, you're just going about your life, you're just going to see Japanese language all around you because of these little switches that you're going to make, so that even if you are not intending to practice, you're still gonna get practice either way. So obviously the most general tips that I can give you to convert the content you switch to Japanese is to start consuming media in Japanese, to switch your phone language to Japanese. My pro tip would be to relabel things around your house in Japanese. Just put a little sticker or a little note on different pieces of furniture or different utensils around your house with their Japanese writing. So for example, on your desk you can add a little temporary label that says Tsukoe and the kanji writing. Every single time you sit down at your desk, you see Tsukoe and you remember what the word actually is. So if you want to take it up a notch, you can literally just go ahead and read them on the daily. Like whenever you see a piece of furniture, you see the label and you just read it out loud. The idea is that if you keep them for like, let's say a month or an extended period of time, then you're going to see them so often that eventually you're going to remember all of them. Another big tip that I can give you is, if you have Japanese books, with that I mean books written in Japanese, move them to the front of your bookshelf, so that whenever you look at your bookshelf, instead of looking at your English title or whatever language you speak, you're going to be exposed to those kanjis and you're going to be more likely to pick those books up. The other really cool way you can increase your exposure is by using music. You can learn a lot of vocab and a lot of the associated kanjis just by looking up at the lyrics. Obviously this is a little bit challenging because the translation may not be the most accurate, but if you really like one song, then you might even try to do your own translation and try to memorize as many kanjis as you can within the lyrics, so that every time that song is playing, you know what they're actually saying, and to actually remember that vocab and the pronunciation. One of the ways that I found out that I was getting better at Japanese was actually when the breakfast song started playing, and I kind of recognized that I could make up most of the words. So I was like, okay, I kind of get the gist of what they're saying, at least the most important stuff. Then I might as well just go ahead and look it up and see, what did I get right, what did I get wrong, why did I think that the translation was different. And then the other way to get some practice in is to actually translate any kanji that you find in real life. Or an example could be, if you're shopping, you come across some Japanese products, you can go ahead and take a moment to actually look at what's written on top of the products and try to translate every kanji that you see on, to see if you got it right. So this is a really easy way to get some practice in where you don't have much time, or you're just on the go, just doing your daily thing. make the most out of your off time, and that is all the time that you're taking just for daily commutes, in between tasks. Whenever you have a little bit of time, instead of just waiting or using it mindlessly, you can actually make the most out of it to get a little bit of revision in. Obviously, you do not have to optimize every single second of your life, but if you're looking to squeeze a little bit of extra practice in, then these time slots are really efficient because they're not going to take any time from your main things. So what you want to do during these downtimes is some form of active recall. So you could either go back to the MochiKanji app that we talked about before, or your physical flashcards, but I also like to do other types of exercise that are just mental practice. This one, for example, is something that I do very often when I take the tube, and it's basically just to sit down and look around me and try to name things that I can see in my target language. So for example, if I have somebody sitting in front of me on the tube and I notice that they have a red shirt, then I'm gonna try to recall how to say red shirt. Or I will even try to make a sentence of that one person. I will see the sliding doors, and maybe I will know the vocab for sliding doors, but I will try to remember the vocab for door, and then for lights, or for chair, and so on and so on and so on. So I recommend that you try to think about them in your head. Even better if you can just visualize the kanjis themselves. After I've done this visualization, so after I've recalled them in my head, then if I have, my phone, or if I have a piece of paper, I'm going to try to write the kanjis to see if I remember the writing correctly by looking it up on my dictionary. And this exercise is going to be a little bit hard, especially if you're not somebody who is used to practice revision that way, but I swear this is one of the best revision techniques that I ever use, not just for Japanese but for any subject, especially highly visual ones. So it might take a little bit of practice, but once you get it down and you're able to think this way, getting that revision in those spare moments is going to be super easy. This is it for today's video. Thank you so much guys for coming along. I know Japanese can be quite an intimidating language with all of this writing system, with the risk of making mistakes, with the levels of formality, and there just seems to be a lot. Try to take it easy and to focus on what you can readily understand, and to leave the most complicated things later, so that you have a very strong foundation when you make the switch from one point to the next. Hopefully these tips are going to help you with increased practices, increased exposure, and just keep at it, and eventually you will get to where you want to be. So I really hope that you like what I had to share today, and I really hope that you find at least something that is a little bit useful, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye!